Grace and peace to you, friends, from the one whose faithfulness sees us through all things. It's good to be reaching out to you again, and I know that many of you are eager to hear from council and to know the results of our council meeting that happened just this past Tuesday, the 9th. And sorry to delay a little bit in getting word out to you. There were some details to iron out and some of the logistics that I wanted to have thought out a little bit longer before that I put it out here to you all now. So a little bit more time to reflect and to discuss was valuable for me, and so I appreciate your patience. So in this video, this time of information sharing, I'll go with the short version of what the decision was from council, and then a little bit of explanation as to how we arrived at that decision, and then go back to that and open up a little bit more about what that means, and the logistics of how we'll work through what council's decision was together. And so without just beating around the bush anymore and keep saying council's decision, what we decided together as council, as the leadership of St. Peter's, is that we will, beginning not this coming Sunday, which is the 14th, but instead rather beginning the following one, beginning June 21st, we will gather for in-person worship again, which marks almost exactly what, March to April, April to May, May to June, 3 months since we have suspended in-person worship. So we will gather again on June 21st for in-person worship, which is wonderful news. It was not without restriction, though. And this is the way that it will happen. It'll be outdoor worship. So it'll be in-person worship only as weather is permitting. Though come if it seems questionable, and we will sort it out from there. So that's the short answer is beginning on June 21st, we will have in-person worship service outside, with the picnic shelter being the central worship space, and then the ability to bring chairs to set out further around that. The picnic tables will actually be spread out and around. And that worship service will be at 9 a.m. So this coming Sunday, the 14th, it'll be as we have worshiped for the last 3 months, which is at our regular time at 10:15, live streamed only. Then on the 21st, it'll be 9 a.m. worship at the picnic shelter, and that service will be both in person and streamed. So if you're uncomfortable being here, or you're not well, or if you're not sure if you're well, then you do not have to feel like you have to be here in order to participate in worship. No matter how else worship is happening, live stream worship happening in real time along with in-person worship is here to stay in some form or another. And so you can rest assured that you'll be able to get that stream to be able to participate in worship, even if you're not able or comfortable with being here in person yet. Now, I'll go then into some of how we got there, which is to say that I know for some the feeling was, as a state and as a county, as we've moved through opening phases, that we are in green, and green means go. But the reality is, even for businesses and other venues of our shared community experience, being in green phase is not without restriction. Right, there are still requests and even places of requirements for masks and distancing, things of that nature. And so even if the phases applied to us as a place of worship, then even distancing and measures are required. However, our decision to not be in person in worship was never solely about what the system of red, yellow, green was. Some of the medical advice that came from that and what that signaled for where we were in the the infections rate in the county, that communicates some information. But it's always been about care for our community, and what is the best way that we can care for one another, the friends and family of St. Peter's, and then the wider Evans City, Butler, Pennsylvania, United States, world community. And so that's what it's been about from the get-go. How do we best serve and care for each other? And so right now, the phases, as I said, weren't targeted to houses of worship. We have been referred to CDC and local health officials and guidelines. And those guidelines, um, for places of worship coming back open, the number one guideline is to still be uh, worshiping virtual only. Now, as we talked about that at council, felt like we have this, not just a yearning to be together, but a need to have that shared personal experience available for some again. So the next recommendation was outdoor worship in an outdoor space. And fortunately, we have the picnic shelter, we have the grounds surrounding it, we have parking lot that comes right up to it, and so we felt like that we could be faithful to the recommendations of the medical community, while being faithful to our the health and well-being care of the community as well. So trying to balance the spiritual care of in-person worship and the health care, that outdoor worship seemed to be the most faithful way that we could balance both of those things. Um, which is to say, in right now with how things are still in with health recommendations and guidance, that indoor in-person worship is not yet something that we are comfortable with as a council. And so, if the weather would be bad on a Sunday morning, then when it comes to time for worship, then we will make the decision to move the service as live stream only from inside the church. And I will come on to the camera and we'll pull up our Facebook page and make the announcement that way as best we can. And anybody who has come to try and be here, to brave the weather, we will give time, about 20 minutes or so, we'll say, for people to get home and to relocate there and to be prepared for worship in that way. And so we'll just come on and say that the worship is moved inside, the start of it's delayed. And so that's one logistical thing that will be a part of outdoor only worship. And another reason why it's outdoor only is we also, in addition to considering the CDC guidelines, the ELCA, along with other denominations, including the Methodist Church and others, produced a 36-page document about care and careful reopening of buildings and worship. And it has wonderful guidelines in that. But for now, perhaps you've heard is advice that singing, because of the way it projects our voices, which projects droplets that can carry the virus, is uh, a dangerous church activity, should we say. So it's recommended to be, for there to be no singing if you are gathered in an inside space. Um, Perhaps so. At best, we could have gathered inside and required masks uh, so that singing could happen, or eliminated singing. But we, as a congregation, are a singing congregation, and that is wonderful. And it felt to us even more upsetting to be here, but not to be able to share together in song. And so, being outside, we felt like that was a mitigation of the singing risk, especially too because we will be keeping the 6-foot social distance requirements as part of outdoor worship. And I'll get into that more into logistics end of things. But we feel like outdoors is a very safe way to engage in activities from all of the medical and scientific reports we have. Singing is a dangerous thing to do. And so we feel like, but there's not one study on outside singing. But since we're outside and at a distance from those, it will be set up in that way. Obviously, if you come together as a family, You don't, or you have people who are part of your circle already. You don't have to then be forced into a distance from them circumstance. But part of the church and the faith community and our Christian lives together and hospitality is that we allow for that space to be there so people can feel less anxiety and more freedom in their worship without having to feel pressured by others to be close. Especially, as I said, since we're preserving singing. And so the outdoors provides the safety to allow that to happen as far as best that we can understand. So that's the short version of how we arrived at that plan of outdoor in person. We know that there are a lot of people who are itching to be back, and that is good and wonderful. We're happy about that. But we also know that the scientific and medical community's advice is to not be indoors in person in worship. If you're going to sing, and if you're going to be indoors and inside, then masks are good, and ways of flow in the building, and keeping separate from one another, especially if they're singing. And so it just felt like we could not have to worry about all those requirements as much if we just use our outdoor space. So that's the plan. And so since we're going to be outside and not everybody will fit under the picnic shelter, we won't have the picnic tables there, but instead there'll be chairs set up, and chairs set up in some groups, and some individual, but between the groups and some individuals, there'll be 6-foot spaces. But it may be enough for everybody. Likely not. I hope it's not. I hope it means that people are comfortable enough being out, and by the modifications we're making for worship, that more than what the picnic shelter can hold will show up, which means that people will be outside of the protection of the roof of the picnic shelter, and so could perhaps have the sun in such a way. We don't want to cause a different kind of distress for people by gathering. So that's the reason we moved the service to 9 o'clock in the morning. And all I know, and I've been told before this time about, there was a time in our history together that we moved the service earlier, and that did not go all that well. But this is for different reasons. This isn't for the sake of just being done with church sooner, or so we can get out and do other things sooner. This is about care for one another, and it's also temporary, in a way that in which we are trying something to see how it best cares for one another. So to try and hit the cool of the day a little bit better, while being outside every day. We're trying our best as a council, as a congregation, to adapt to everybody's needs in the environment that we have now, in order to have what we all want, which is to be together in worship of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And so I have full confidence, as we are a people of God's grace. I have full confidence that all of you, all of us together, will be able to respond to these changes and these tweaks, and circumstances in a gracious way. We are people of God's grace, given God's grace, so we can respond graciously. So I have no doubt in your ability to be able to handle modified things and times and ways of worshiping, in fully gracious ways. So I am so thankful that I am with all of you and in a place where I can say that and have no fear of what it will mean to make these kind of changes, because of the love and Christian spirit that is shared among us in this place. So that's a credit to you, and I am thankful for your displays of that already, that give me and the council that kind of confidence in being able to move forward in this way. So 9 a.m. worship does mean that that's when we would have had book study starting in a few weeks. We'll just move book study to afterwards, and book study will be available through Zoom and in person for whoever. As long as worship happened in person, we'll have under the picnic shelter, properly distant, book study while still offering. I'll have my computer there. We have the internet hooked up and ready, fixed up, so that way we pick up the internet fine from outside that way too. So you'll be able to, even if it's your home, be able to participate. in book study that way, and live stream that way. So that's part of things. Also, we will have in-person communion, but we will have communion at our seats. And so we've thought about how we could best do that. And of course, none of this is exactly what we're used to, exactly what our top preference is, but in all of these things, we're trying to make the best of what we can do, given the limitations that a global pandemic puts on us. And so it's communion at your seat, and we went ahead and purchased. They're pre-filled. They're the same basic kind of cups that we usually use. They'll be plastic and pre-filled and sealed, and then with a wafer sealed on top with that. So you have to open a couple of seals to do it, but we will have those provided as at the seats, tables already, and bulletins provided at seats and tables already. So there's not the kind of contact and risk of cross-contamination of picking things up. We might have a couple of tables where there's extra, but those will be pushed out and distanced out too. So we'll sit those out at seats and places. When we get to that time in communion, I'll preside like usual. I'll lift up a host, and I'll lift up the chalice, and you'd be welcome to elevate your elements with that and offer a blessing in that way. And then I'll share that the body of Christ is given for you, and partake in that, in the blood of Christ, and partake in that, and then invite us to do time of blessing with children who are there after that. So that's in a nutshell communion too. It'll be at our seats, and the elements will be there already, pre-packaged, and we'll have a can then out there that we can put those into and plan to recycle what we can recycle. So to try and mitigate our environmental impact of single-use things. So that's, and I should reiterate in all this, I don't think I mentioned it earlier because I said we're going to try it out, but I wasn't clear, that this we are going to try. This isn't the permanent solution to all of this. This gives us about 3 or 4 weeks of trying things this way until council meets again. And usually council wouldn't meet in July and take that off because business is lighter in the summer. Well, that's not our reality right now, and so council has agreed to meet in July to look specifically at this, at our building use, at our worship, and how it has felt, and what tweaks and the pros and cons and things like that. So please be a part of things. Please give feedback. This isn't a permanent. Try along with us and see how this goes and what it's like. And that takes us through a lot of the logistical things. A couple more things though, is that if you recall the layout of things, I'm going to lead from what might seem like the back of the picnic shelter, the place by our white pines closest to the Mitchells, our neighbors, so that the church gravel lot area would be the rear of worship. So you can come in and just fill in rather than having to walk past me to fill in chairs and one another. And tables be spread out around that in that way. Also, the driveway continues in a flat gravel grassy way up to our current shed garage in a way that probably fits at least 2, maybe 3 cars. And we want to leave that open as a way for handicap accessible worship, or very limited mobility worship space, such that you could literally drive your car right up to the garage, and another one behind that, and another behind that, and stay in your car and sit there, windows down or doors open, whatever the case may be, or keep it hug left enough, like that would be toward the parsonage property, that way enough there'd be enough to put a chair and come out and sit right there. So that trying to account for, as I said, different logistics. If you want to be here and feel like you're healthy and well enough to be here, but are worried about the travel of things, we'll leave those. That's handicap worship right there. Also, as best you can, if you have no mobility restriction, leave the gravel lot that is my driveway and the parsonage driveway and lot open for those who have mobility issues. So that gravel lot almost becomes more like, it's not a handicapped lot, but it's at least can be a limited mobility lot, as best it can be. So as much as you can, if you're coming to worship, and that's nice and it's close and it's not a handicapped lot, but try and save it. But you don't have to feel like, oh, there's somebody absolutely worse than me. If you need it, use it. Um, so we will be hospitable in that way. You do not have to sign up for worship, but I would encourage you, if you do let me know ahead of time, I can try to arrange the chairs and communion things and bulletins as best I can, as much ahead as I can. So if you're coming on the 21st in person, you don't have to let me know, just like you never have before, but it would be helpful. Like I said, I'll have chairs. So say there's a group of 4 chairs, 6 feet, and another chair. Um, if you or if you're coming and there's only 2 of you, don't take the 4 chairs because somebody can't sit in with you. Unless you plan ahead of time with other people. This is a group of 4 that I'm comfortable worshiping with, close by with. I don't mind singing and talking at one another's faces. So know ahead of time, who you might be comfortable with. Don't, as an individual or a couple of people, sit down in a space that more could sit in together. Also, we have to be careful about chair moving. I might have a single chair, 6 feet, another single chair, and then 6 feet and another chair. And it could be possible to fill, if there are 5 or 6 people who that realistically won't fit between 2 chairs. But we could fill in some chairs in between when we see how it happens. But we can't then bridge that 6 foot, then a next 6 foot gap, unless that whole row is willing to be taken up by people who are comfortable together. And so there's just this logistical dynamic that we're going to have to figure it out as we go. So we say 9 a.m. worship. It'd be helpful to let me know a little bit ahead of time so I can have an idea of how numbers and go and organize and set the place for people to be as ahead hospitable as I can. But also to be a little early so we can sort out chair sorting. And for those of you who will be just at home and will be worshiping with us electronically, understand that even though we say worship starts at 9, especially that first week and maybe some others, the actual service is probably going to take a little bit longer before it starts, just as we all get settled in to space as best we can and figure out our distancing and how we mesh together in person. So just grace, everyone, as we try and sort that out. We won't, when we're together, we won't share the peace by shaking or hugging or moving. We'll stay in our place and we'll wave and acknowledge one another. Offering will be done by just having a plate there and putting it in. We won't pass plates. We'll just have a couple of plates stationed out for you to drop it in. These are changes that we made before we had to postpone in-person worship anyhow. There won't be a separate nursery somewhere else. Try your best to not have to use the restroom while you're here, and understand that if you do, there's nobody standing there to sanitize it in between uses. It's just the way it is. So we can have that open, but understand that that's kind of an own risk thing. And speaking of own risk, I mean, nobody is forced to be here in worship. Come as you feel comfortable and able. Don't come if you feel any amount of unwellness, any amount of sickness, any sorts of indication that you're less than your healthy best, in a way that might be a viral sort of sickness. Obviously, these are common sense ways that we care for each other. And let us remember too that when we see one another, as happy as we are to see each other, we should at first, unless we've talked ahead, spent time ahead together, see one another as much as they are beloved of us, as though we have the virus, and this is the most beloved person in the world who we would never dare and dream of anything bad happening to them, right? So as much as we love closeness and love a little bit of the sense of freedom that it has to be moving out together, please respect that space until there is agreement that space not need to be there. Christianity is about emptying ourselves to serve the other for the sake of the other. All things, we love our neighbor as ourselves. We give of ourselves first. That is what it means to be great in the kingdom. And that is how we do it in these days, which is to honor space. And if we were to be worshiping indoors, I say now it would be masked, because that's the loving thing to do for each other. But we're outside and we don't have to do that. But the restriction we have now instead is space. So honor the space, and ask. It may feel awkward. You can ask, but don't feel awkward in saying no. This is how we love and care for each other, is to feel where our comfort level is, and we honor that. And nobody is wrong for feeling like they need to maintain that space, because the medical community has continued to say, even though we are trying to open up the country for the sake of businesses and workers and the economy, pandemic is not over. The virus has not gone away. And so we are simply finding ways to be together with the best mitigated risk as possible. The only way we can do that is all buy in together to love each other in grace. And so this is the way we're doing that. I'm sure I've left things out. I'm longer than, as always, as I wanted to be and was told I should be, but I know no other way. So I am who I am, and this is the pastor that you have. So Sunday, June 21st, 9 a.m., in-person worship at the picnic shelter. The gravel driveway is handicapped worship space. You may bring your own chair if you want. There'll be some set up under the shelter, tables outside of the shelter. Gravel lot for mobility issues. Communion at your seats. Prepackaged communion elements there for you, bulletin there for you, offering dropped off. And by the way, since I said offering, I'm so grateful for the way in which the community has found ways to continue to support the work and mission of the church. It's amazing. You're amazing. And so that is what we are trying together for the next few weeks until we reconvene as council to see what the world is like then and how this worship experience has gone. In the meantime, this Sunday, the 14th, electronically gathered worship, live stream worship only, and then another evening service in the same way that we had an evening service last week also. So the elements will be available for you again outside here if you need them for that, and I would encourage you to be a part of that communing experience as well. So thank you for being with us through these 3 months of being apart and continuing for whatever time you still need to be away. I understand that. If there's ways that I can minister to you while you're apart still, please let me know that. I offer as best I can my pastoral care of you in whatever way that I can. And so thank you for sticking with us through this time and through this video and through the future time as we figure out how we can continue to be the best version of our St. Peter's community we can. I'm looking forward to seeing more than 2 faces in worship at once, and to have that interaction. As much as I want to hug everyone, know that I've done that countless times already in my offering of peace on Sunday mornings and in my prayers of you. So thank you very much for being you, for being a people of God's grace, and for your love and prayers and support through these days and in the days to come. I love you. God bless you, and be well.